Hello, I'm Gary Scudder, a professor in the core division, ably assisted by the excellent Dr. Cindy Brandenburg. And today I want to talk about something relating to Core 120, specifically how I use David Hackett Fischer's book, Albion Seed. First off, I'm not really that big of a fan of Albion Seed, mainly because it's American history, and I'm a British historian, and American history is really boring. It's like British history without the exciting highs and lows, and with much worse literature. So I'm not really that big a fan of American history, but I actually sort of like this book, even though it's a bit through and through for my taste. But I think it was well chosen for a number of reasons. I want to talk specifically about how I use this book, which I think I use it probably in kind of a different way than most people use it. For those of you who aren't familiar and you're new to this, this book is an attempt to explain why Americans do what they do. Why are Americans Americans? And historians have always been fascinated by this subject for a long time, ever since the days of Frederick Jackson Turner's Frontier thesis was about 100 years ago or so, over 120 years ago now, where essentially he said, you know, it's all about the frontier. That the frontier is what made Americans to be independent and equal in a sense of self-determination. So when the frontier ended, it really said a lot about the creation of Americans. And since then, a lot of people had theories about what made Americans Americans. And his theory, Hackett's theory, or Fischer's theory, is pretty obvious, and that is this. He looks at four main areas, four main groups in the colonial world. He looks at the Puritans, he looks at the Virginians, he looks at the Quakers, and he looks at the backcountry. And he says you really just have to look at where they came from in the UK, right? Well, at the time, England. Essentially, it was, did they come from a particular region? And where they came from determined what they would turn into in America. It's literally as simple as that. So we have four distinctive groups coming from four distinctive areas in the British Isles. And then he looks at it by talking about 24 different ways. And it's very anthropological. There's things like speech ways, building ways, family ways, marriage ways, gender ways, sex ways, child rearing ways, naming ways, age ways, death ways, religious ways, magic ways, learning ways, food ways, dress ways, sport ways, work ways, time ways, wealth ways, rank ways, social ways, order ways, power ways, freedom ways. So you have four really big chapters. And the structure is really essentially the same every one. So here are the Puritans, and let's look at these 24 different ways and compare what they were like back in the British Isles to what they became here. So it's remarkably well structured, which I think helps the students. But the problem is, how do you use this tome? Because you could literally use this by itself in a colonial American history class, and here you're competing for attention with other disciplines and other books. So how does one do it gracefully? I don't know if I've done it gracefully. I've tried a bunch of different ways. Either I've tried to do all four, that didn't work. I've tried to do 3 of the different groups. And sometimes I've even just done 2. Let's just do the Virginians, and let's do the Puritans, and that's it. And just focus on that. What I'm talking about now is I want to do what I'm doing right now. This is my current approach, which I think works out very well. And I've used this for about 3 years. I've used this in the regular 120. I've used this in the summer bridge. What I do is, and usually about the 3rd day of the semester, I let the students choose the ways themselves. We set aside an entire day where I break the students up into groups. Now, these don't have to be the official groups that they follow in the entire semester. Remember, because the big project in Core 120 is the creation of the good, just, and sustainable society. These don't have to be those groups. So this is literally really early in the semester. And every group has to come up with their own 10. That is, if you had to essentially say, of these 24, which are the 10 that you think would be most useful, you choose them. So every group has its 10, which they have to defend. And what I like about this, it's making them very early on think about why in the hell you are learning this. This isn't just so you can learn some interesting stuff about colonial America. It's because you're using this for a reason. So every group has to come up with their 10, but then there has to be the meta group. which means there has to be a lot of discussion, a lot of compromise. The students have to understand what the ways mean, which means they have to read it before they ever get there. It often leads to a lot of arguments. And I try to stay back. I really try to essentially almost dramatically walk myself out of the discussion and make the students own their decision. And it leads to a big fight. Okay, so they eventually choose their 10. And once they've choose their 10, then that's what we follow for the rest of the semester. It doesn't mean you can't look at the other ways, especially in their individual research, but we're going to focus in class on those 10. So I give them a syllabus, and on the syllabus it essentially just says on that day, way 1, way 2, way 3, way 4. And we fill in specifically what that way is only after they have chosen it, because I'm very manic about having these things done before the semester. So they have to choose this. And the assumption is on those days, we're going to spend the first half hour of that day talking specifically about that way. Now the charge they have is this. They have to say you've chosen power ways, correct? Then for that day, they have to read and take notes on the 4 different definitions of power with essentially 2 directives. One is compare, contrast. Think about how these 4 distinctive societies are using power ways and what it means. But secondly, and maybe more importantly, very practically, what is a takeaway, both good or bad, that might influence your thinking on your creation of a good, just, and sustainable society? Is there something that Puritans did which you think is beneficial and you want to copy? Or is it something that Puritans did which you think is really bad that you want to duck, but I want you to think about how you would use this? So every time, 10 times in the semester, we meet. It might be sex ways, it might be power ways, it might be... They always choose speech ways, which is really dumb, but I mock them for it. But that's okay. That's their own choice. It just means they have to do more work later on. And that's what we're going to do. I think the advantages of it are pretty obvious. One, it makes them get into groups really early on. Even if it's not the official group they follow, they realize that this is going to be a very group-driven class. 2, I think it makes them take ownership of the choices that they've made. 3, and this is an important one, it makes them, how to put this, it makes them understand why we're learning it. That they understand that, again, this is not just random historical stuff, this is a particular concept that they are using in the construction of your good, just, and sustainable society. So they understand the point of it. Also, I think it locks them in like a laser on the good, just, and sustainable society. That they understand from the beginning that this is where this is going. So I think it works very, very well. One of the reasons why I think that I get very good self-portraits in the 110 and community projects in the 120 is that I just hammer them with it. And the notion is every day, as I say to them, in the 110, every single thing we're going to talk about this semester is taking us toward the self-portrait. And in the 120, every single thing that we're going to talk about takes us to the good, just, and sustainable society. So you lock into it. And I understand why some people downplay both of these assignments, but I think it's a mistake because we have a very unique curriculum, and just having them write another paper is not a particularly unique thing. Both of these assignments really reward creative and critical thinking. So I pace everything towards the creation of those 2 items. So this is what I do, and I think it works very well. If anyone would love to get together and talk about it, I'd be more than happy to. Thank you.